Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. This episode is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Call us at 719-452-4803. Here's your host, Trevor Sherry.
Welcome to Candid Conversation, Season 1, Episode 2. We are coming back from last week's conversation about conversations, and hope that you have listened to that and that you were able to take stock of who safe people might be to talk to. We're going to dive into that a little bit more this week, of defining what does it mean to be a safe person, what is a safe place, and what that has to do with conversations. Dr. Mark, how are you today?
Good, and it's fun to be back and continuing the conversation.
Totally, I'm super thrilled for this. So last week we did talk about just the importance of having a conversation, about having conversations and not trying to be right, but understanding where the other person is coming from. And that takes a lot of self-awareness and a lot of just being aware of who you are and what you're bringing to the table and who that other person is and what they may be bringing to the table. We ended last week mentioning safe people. And as I mentioned when we brought this up in the broadcast, to me, the first thought is Vin Diesel from The Pacifier, as somebody who's going to just keep you safe from ninjas that are trying to steal your dad's information or whatever. But I'm sure that's not what we're talking about.
Well, I'd be more safe with The Rock than Vin Diesel, I think. But
we'll leave that for another episode where we may decide who is right and wrong. Okay. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because as I've been in this field, and I think this is true for many that are caregivers, when we sit down and talk with people that are coming across our couch or just having conversations with, they really don't know how to choose safe people. They don't know what a safe person is. And I think it's evidenced by the fact that people get hurt over and over again in the same ways, right?
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to give 5 considerations for our listeners of maybe what a safe person looks like. I think the first one, and here's the thing, this doesn't happen overnight. Like Trevor, you and I have known each other for going on 2 years.
Yeah.
This type of podcast, conversation wouldn't work when we first met because we didn't know each other.
Yeah,
right?
It won't work with Joe Schmo off the side of the street that I just pulled in. And
so I want our listeners to understand this is going to take time. It's going to take effort. Good relationships happen over time. And so I think that's the first thing, right, with this, when we're talking about a safe person, is are they true to their word? And you're not going to know that until you get to know somebody over time. Do they follow through with what they say they're going to do? And if they do, or if they do as best as they can over time, then they might be a safe person. I think, does this individual, so if they're true to their word, do they welcome you for personal growth and encouragement? Are they championing? I can't say that word.
Championing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You as an individual, are they intently desirous of your growth? And if they are, they could be a safe person. Are they vulnerable? Like I know growing up in middle school and high school, I was the one that was always sharing my story, and I was sharing my story probably in the first 2 seconds of meeting somebody. Like, okay, I wasn't embodying what a safe person would look like, but I was the vulnerable one, and I thought if I led with my vulnerability, then everybody else would be vulnerable too. Like, that doesn't work. Vulnerability again happens over time, and I think if you're in a safe relationship, there's mutual vulnerability. Right? I will tell you something, and I'm not saying it's a tit for tat thing. Like, I tell you something, okay, I'm waiting, your turn to share something vulnerable. It's more so, I'm going to be vulnerable in this moment. I'm having a really crappy day. I'm struggling, and you sit and listen, and you provide that space for me, and then it reciprocates down the road, and you're vulnerable with me. Now we are building that trust towards a safe person. So, are you true to your word? Do you encourage each other towards personal growth? Are you vulnerable? And have you had hard conversations? Like, I think sometimes the best way to test out a safe person sometimes is, if you're having a bad day and you snap at somebody, or you get your feelings hurt, or you get defensive, or you start arguing, are you able to sit through and work through those things? Not get over it, not move on, not stuff it, not squelch it, but actually sit down and go, you know what, that really hurt my feelings, and here's why. And the other person is like, oh, wow, yeah, so sorry. And it's a big piece in developing a safe person. And then lastly, are you able to give grace? Yep, I screwed up. And maybe it was a big deal, and you're like, as the receiving end of that person going, I really want to just, lay into you and give you what I'm thinking, but you're like, no, nope, we're human. Let's give each other grace. Yeah. And so I think if you put those 5 together, over time, you're beginning to develop a safe person.
Yeah, which I think is an incredible thing for us to be able to recognize in ourselves and in other people. The part about having grace and understanding the other person and being forgiving is huge. I mean, today I woke up totally on the wrong side of the bed. And have just been, I've been real grumpy today. And there have been a few interactions with coworkers where I wasn't trying to be one way, but it came across that way, and they were really quick when I came to them and saying, like, you know what, I shouldn't have responded that way. Right. To be like, oh, I know who you are, and I know that that's not you. And just that understanding is huge. And it's so encouraging to me to have someone in my life where I know if I mean to go and just sigh and express how I'm feeling and instead go, like, they're going to understand what was going on and have some grace towards me. I think that's huge.
Well, it is. And like I said, I don't mean to repeat this over and over again, but that happens over time. Yeah. It happens through trial and error. But I also think a lot of us don't pay attention to how we feel. How, like, are we anxious or pensive, or, like, our body tells us in a lot of ways too if a person's safe or not. And we don't ever learn to listen to that. I do this exercise with people on boundaries when I go out and talk, and I have them pick a partner that they've never actually met or maybe are not in deeper relationship with, and they line up on opposite ends of the room from each other and stare at each other. And I tell them, hold eye contact, and when I say go, take a step forward, and stop when you feel something. And then, of course, everybody wants detailed directions on, what do you mean when you feel something? And, no, I'm not going to give you detailed directions. So when I say go, take a step, you take a step, and stop when you feel something. And a lot of times people are, get to the point where they're actually, getting close to kissing or embracing, and they're really uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, wait a second. When did you feel something? Well, I got uncomfortable like 6 steps back. Hello, like, why didn't you stop? Oh. And I think if we pay attention to that part of our body, the ability to actually listen to how our body is feeling and communicating to us, it would save us a lot of heartache from entering into relationships with people that aren't safe.
Yeah, that's a difficult task to do, of being mindful of that, it seems.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking back on my life. I'm sure you can too, of just how many times we didn't pay attention to that, and we thought we were entering into good relationships, and we were taken advantage of, or whether intentionally or unintentionally, right? Screwed over. It was not a good thing.
I think this brings up for me something that's essential, and I've had the opportunity to share with my sister, and she got a lot out of it. You don't have to be friends with anybody.
Right.
You get to choose who you want to enter into relationship with. And, we have the situations with coworkers or family where we're stuck with those individuals for the most part. Like, we can't choose to just totally wall them off and ignore them most of the time.
Sure.
But when it comes to your friends, the people you're choosing to spend time with, your obligation is to do what is going to be mutually beneficial. And sometimes relationships aren't that way. and you have every right to choose the relationships that are going to be healthy for you.
Yeah, and I think the hard part is that we can actually do that in families too. I've worked with a lot of families where they've been taken advantage of, where there's a controlling person in that, and they're not safe, and we think, okay, because they're family, they should be safe, and that's not a fair statement. And so being able to set boundaries with those individuals, so you can still operate in relationship, but you're holding them at a distance, or you're operating within that boundary so that you're protected. I think that's the thing, is that when we think about safe people, we need to think of it in a way that is, how do I maintain my identity and myself without getting hurt?
Yeah, so let's dig into that just a little bit more. If you're in a situation where you're in relationship with somebody and you can't just cut it off, it's a family member or for some reason you can't cut it off, or it's not necessarily totally unhealthy, what boundaries are you talking about? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to understand, and this is another conversation we don't have, is what are boundaries. And I often talk about the idea that we can think of our boundaries in three terms, and they're not hard and set boundaries, because I think boundaries change with people or change between people. But you start off with this idea of a wall. If you've been hurt, it doesn't take much to put a wall up, right? You hurt me, I don't want to feel that way again. So boom, there's that 30-foot castle-looking brick wall. I'm going to be on the other side, and you're going to be on the opposite side, and you can't hurt me anymore. It just happens naturally, and sometimes it's needed. But then we have the fence post, right? And I always joke that I'm a recovering people pleaser, because my boundaries were fence posts. I wanted people to like me so badly growing up that anything and everything was permissible and acceptable. And that's not healthy either. But there are times where that's needed, right? And then I also look at this idea of like the backstop of a baseball field, a chain link fence. It's 20 feet high. You can see through it. You can pass things through it. You can see what's coming. It's surrounding you. There's a point of entry with a gate that you can control. And in some ways, it's a reciprocal, mutually beneficial boundary. But like I said, I want to reiterate this, is that it can go between any of the three. And so when we have a family member who should be a chain link fence or fence post, right, and ends up being a wall, we have to navigate and negotiate kind of what that looks like at any given point. And if we think about it this way, that can change. Those boundaries can change in the course of a Thanksgiving dinner with that family member, right? You might wall up on some things, like we're not going there, and you might be flexible on some other things. But I think we can become very rigid with our boundaries. Nope, it's a wall, and it's going to be a wall on everything. No, that's not beneficial for you. Like, you're hurting yourself when you do that kind of stuff. And so it's that reflective piece, like we talked about, to really take into consideration, what are your boundaries?
Yeah, I think that's huge. I wanted to ask about safe places.
Okay.
And whether or not that you're talking about a physical location, or are you talking about the setting? What does a safe place mean if we know who a safe person is?
Sure. I think it needs to be mutually agreed upon, right? I mean, you and I, Trevor, could go to Starbucks and have some pretty deep conversations and not really care what people are thinking around us. That doesn't work for everybody, and especially if you're being vulnerable. I think some of the conversations that we're going to engage in over this season is talking about some really vulnerable things. Anxiety, depression, race, religion, culture. Maybe you don't want to have those in a Starbucks. Maybe you do. I mean, but you've got to decide that for yourself, and it has to be mutual, because there's a power dynamic there. That if one person is comfortable and the other person is not, now we have a power differential that's not acceptable for these types of conversations. But also, don't have them over Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or text or email. There's something to be said about sitting face to face, either across from each other, looking at each other in the eyes, or sitting side by side, going for a walk or a hike, driving in a car. but you need to be in physical proximity for these conversations.
Yeah. There was I don't know whether it was an article I read or a story I heard, but it was a short phrase of men bond side by side and women bond face to face. And I find that super interesting. And obviously it's a generalization,
Sure.
but that sometimes, even, my best friend and I, or even my wife, we feel really connected if we're doing something side by side, not looking at each other, but next to each other. Would you mind sharing your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm going to just say this, and I might offend somebody, and I apologize if I do, but I almost feel like that's a cultural cop-out. We're intended, like the way that we were designed was to look it into each other's eyes. Like we were designed to hold eye contact and because it's the window to the soul. Like if you can think about if you're married and your spouse and you've become really close and you can look into your spouse's eyes and know when something's up, even if they're not saying it, you're connected. And I think that's the type of relationships that we need, but we've gone away from with our social media. We've gone away from with our fast-paced culture. And so, yeah, I think there are appropriate times for side-by-side interaction, but is that completely getting rid of that face-to-face contact? Our identity is developed. And when we look into our parents' eyes, what is reflected back? That's how we develop our stories. If we have pleasure, I look into my father's eyes and there's acceptance and happiness and joy and pleasure for what he sees. What is my story going to be? Right? But if I see disdain or anger or never look into my father's eyes, what's my story going to be? And so I think a lot of the conversation is going to be lost if we don't have that face-to-face contact. But you gotta ease into that, especially in this culture, because that freaked most people out.
Well, yeah, and we talked previously about how the average individual spends 30 seconds total a day making eye contact with somebody else. And that's cumulative. That's not just like 30 seconds at one time, which would be quite a large number for a lot of us.
For a lot of people, yeah.
But it's a cumulative throughout the day. I've spent 30 seconds looking into somebody's eyes. You and I already have spent a half hour almost looking at each other in the eyes. And that's super uncomfortable. And when we think about this, the social media aspect, we have become a culture that spends a lot of time looking at our phones, and it's a joke, but it's true too that we sometimes text each other in the same room, across the dinner table, and that's a comfortable form of communication for a lot of us, but maybe not a healthy form of communication for us.
Well, I just think about the other day in the office here. I'm in my office, you're up the front, and I texted you instead of getting up out of my chair and walking down and talking.
Yeah, and that might just be laziness.
Right? It might be laziness too, right? But I think that's the important, like going back to those 5 components of being a safe person. And we, we'll expand more on this, whether it be through a blog or something on our website. But the vulnerability piece is so big, because you can't hide when you look at somebody in the eyes. And if you're not ready, don't do it.
Yeah.
Ease into it. If you don't have a safe person, don't do it.
And I also along the lines of social media, texting, whatever, it's so interesting to me how we post the highlights and we don't talk about the less glamorous aspects of our lives and how that impacts our verbal communication too. I know that there's a lot of times that I'll walk into a space and we don't dive into what's really the like main thing on my mind at that time. It's the, hey, how are things? Oh, they're great. Like, we just did this one thing and it was awesome. And I have a picture of me with a dolphin. Check it out. And that's such a Facebook mentality. Yes. Of I can't be vulnerable with people that may be safe people, to show them what may not be a highlight of my day, but the thing that is most present in my mind at the time.
You've just inspired me to go home and take a picture of my desk and post it on Facebook, because it's not perfect, right? It's just a mess. Well, no, I think you're right, and that takes us pushing through the uncomfortability. This is a good process, and I can promise that. Like, I don't promise a lot of things, but I can promise that if you begin this process of finding safe people and entering into these conversations, it's going to be good. But it's going to be hard. It's going to take work. You're going to have to push through the uncomfortability. You have to work through it. And a lot of that is the refining of yourself. But the end result is amazing.
Before we give out the next step for the episode, would you mind listing out those 5 characteristics of a safe person again?
So yeah, the 5 characteristics of a safe person: are they true to their word? Do they follow through with it, what they say they're going to do? Do they welcome and encourage personal growth? Do they have your best interest at heart and your goals and your growth? Are they vulnerable? Are they able to have hard conversations? And do they give grace? And if we can stick to those 5, or at least begin with those 5, I think we're going to set ourselves up for some success.
Yeah. You and I mean, we haven't talked about this, but what encouragement can we give our listeners this week to take a step forward into more meaningful conversations with safe people?
Well, if you're taking a look around and you're going, well, this is the most depressing podcast I've ever heard because I have no safe people and I have no place to turn. Irving Yalom, a famous therapist that you and I really enjoy, said that sometimes it's okay to have a paid friend. And so there's something to be said that if you don't have that, because maybe you've never been given the opportunity for that, or having safe people in your life, it's okay to either go to your local clergy or come to a counselor. Find a counselor that you can have that begin those reparative works and healing, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with going to counseling. You're going to hear us say that over and over and over and over again. But it's maybe you need that reprieve from the world, and you find a safe person in a counseling room, and be encouraged that that's okay.
Yeah. Our website is mayfieldcounseling.com. Our phone number is 719-452-4803. You can hit extension to get a hold of our representative there. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We'll have links available to that as well. Feel free to reach out to us for counseling, but also feel free to reach out to us with any questions that our podcasts have brought up, or anything that you would really like us to cover. This podcast is, we want it to be a resource to you, to help equip you to grow and excel at being a neighbor, a friend, a spouse, a mom, a dad, just anyone in relationship with others. We've talked before about how the brain doesn't fully develop unless you're in relationship with someone else, and we want to make sure that you're equipped to have good and meaningful relationships. So feel free to reach out to us with whatever's on your mind. We'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Mark, thank you for this conversation today. I really appreciated it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, go to mayfieldcounseling.com/Candid Conversations and check out our Facebook page, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield.